I'm sorry, ma'am, but first class is for paying customers, not for dramatic outbursts." Those were the last words head purser Beatrice Smith said, before turning her back on a dying 10-year-old boy. At 35,000 feet, there is no ambulance, no hospital, and nowhere to run. But what Beatrice didn't know was that the man sitting in seat 1A wasn't just sleeping. He was watching. And when Flight 902 was forced to dump fuel and scream back toward JFK, the karma waiting on the tarmac wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a life sentence. This is the story of how one woman's arrogance almost killed a child, and the brutal justice that followed. The rain at JFK International Airport was relentless, hammering against the fuselage of the massive Boeing 777 like handfuls of gravel. Inside the cabin of Transatlantic Airways Flight 902. However, the atmosphere was hermetically sealed, luxury. The air smelled of expensive leather, sanitized, recirculated oxygen, and the distinct, crisp scent of fresh champagne. Beatrice Smith, the flight's chief purser, adjusted the silk scarf around her neck. She caught her reflection in the galley mirror. Perfect. Not a hair out of place. Beatrice had been flying for 22 years. She wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the gatekeeper of the Golden Curtain, the thick divider that separated the wealthy elite in first class from the cattle in economy. To Beatrice, the passengers back in row 40 were merely cargo. The passengers in row 1, however, were her ticket to better connections, better tips, and perhaps one day, a husband rich enough to ground her permanently. "We have a full load today, Beatrice," said Chloe, a junior attendant who looked terrified of her supervisor. "Economy is oversold by 3. Beatrice sneered, checking the manifest on her tablet. "As long as they stay behind the curtain, I don't care if they're sitting on each other's laps. Just keep the noise down. We have a VIP in 1A. She glanced toward seat 1A. The man was older, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit, reading a Financial Times with intense focus. The manifest listed him simply as A. Rockefeller. Beatrice's heart had fluttered when she saw the name. A Rockefeller. On her flight, she had already brought him a hot towel and a glass of Dom Perignon before the plane even pushed back from the gate. "Excuse me." The voice was soft, hesitant, and came from the boarding door. Beatrice turned her professional smile, already straining. Standing there was Sarah Jenkins. She was a young black woman, looking exhausted, wearing a simple grey hoodie and jeans. She was holding the hand of her son Leo. The boy was small for his age, perhaps 10 years old, with wide, nervous eyes and a backpack that looked too big for him. "Boarding pass?" Beatrice asked, her tone dropping 3 degrees in warmth. Sarah fumbled with her phone. "Yes, sorry. We were supposed to be in row 45, but the gate agent said something about an overbooking issue. They printed us new tickets." Beatrice snatched the thermal paper from Sarah's hand. She scanned it and her eyebrows shot up. Row 4. Business class. Because economy was oversold, the computer algorithm had automatically bumped Sarah and Leo up to the last row of business class to make room in the back. It happened rarely, but it happened. Beatrice felt a spike of irritation. Row 4 was right behind the Golden Curtain. It was too close to her sanctuary. "This must be a mistake," Beatrice muttered, looking at Sarah's worn sneakers and Leo's fidgeting hands. "The lady at the gate said it was an upgrade," Sarah said, squeezing Leo's hand. "Is it okay, Leo?" "He gets anxious flying. We just want to sit down." Beatrice sighed a loud, theatrical exhale through her nose. She couldn't deny the ticket. It was valid, but she didn't have to like it. Down that aisle, Beatrice pointed with 2 fingers, not bothering to make eye contact. 4th row. Do not place bags in the overhead bins reserved for row 1 through 3. And please, she looked sharply at Leo, keep the volume down. This is a premium cabin. People here are paying for silence. We will, Sarah promised, guiding Leo forward. Thank you. As they walked past, Leo looked up at Beatrice and offered a shy, gap-toothed smile. Hi. Beatrice didn't blink. She turned her back and walked toward the galley, pulling the curtain shut with a sharp swish. Unbelievable, Beatrice whispered to Chloe. We're running a charity ward today. The engines roared to life, a deep, vibrating hum that shook the floorboards. The pilot, Captain Robert Miller, came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, flight attendants prepare for departure. Next stop, London Heathrow. As the plane taxied, Sarah buckled Leo in. The seats were massive leather recliners that swallowed Leo's small frame. Mum, Leo whispered, rubbing his chest. It smells funny in here. It's just the cleaning stuff, baby. Sarah soothed him, stroking his hair. Just close your eyes. We'll be there in the morning to see Grandma. But it wasn't the cleaning fluid. It was the crushing pressure of the cabin pressurizing and something else, something floating in the recycled air that Leo's sensitive immune system had already detected, even if his mother hadn't. The wheels left the tarmac. The plane climbed steep into the grey sky. For Beatrice Smith, the flight was just another Tuesday. But for Sarah and Leo, the clock had just started ticking. 40 minutes into the flight, the seatbelt sign pinged off. The cabin activity began. In the front galley, Beatrice was in her element. She was preparing the meal service for first-class lobster thermidor and truffle risotto. She moved with practiced efficiency, plating the food on fine china. She made sure to give extra attention to Mr. Rockefeller in 1A, topping off his glass before he could even ask. Is everything to your liking, sir? She cooed, leaning in slightly. The man in 1A looked up. He had piercing blue eyes and a face that looked like it had seen many boardrooms and perhaps a few battlefields. It's fine, thank you, Beatrice. He knew her name. She preened. Meanwhile, in row 4, the atmosphere was shifting. Leo had stopped playing with the in-flight entertainment screen. He had dropped the controller and was scratching at his neck. His skin, usually a warm brown, was taking on a greyish-ashy tone. Mom, he wheezed. The sound was wet like a sponge being squeezed. Sarah, who had been dozing, snapped awake. She looked at her son and felt a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline spike through her veins. She knew that look. She knew that sound. Leo. Leo, look at me. Leo turned his head. His eyes were watering, and his lips were swelling, puffing out like he had been stung by a bee. He clawed at his throat. Can't breathe, he gasped. Sarah unbuckled immediately. She grabbed her bag from under the seat, tearing through the zipper. The EpiPen. Where is the EpiPen? She dug past wet wipes, passports, snacks. Her hand closed around the plastic tube. She yanked it out. Empty. She stared at it in horror. It was the used casing from his last attack 3 months ago. She had grabbed the wrong bag in the rush to the airport. No, 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 Sarah whispered. She checked the side pockets. Nothing. She checked Leo's backpack. Nothing. Leo let out a high-pitched, stridulous sound, the sound of an airway closing tighter than a fist. Sarah hit the call button. Bing. She waited. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Leo was gasping harder now, his chest heaving, but getting no air. Sarah hit the button again. Bing. 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 Up in the galley, Beatrice rolled her eyes. The indicator light for seat 4B was flashing annoyingly on her panel. "Chloe, go see what the upgrade wants," Beatrice commanded, not looking up from her tray of cheeses. "Probably can't figure out how to recline the seat." Chloe hurried down the aisle, but was intercepted by a passenger in row 2, asking for another scotch. By the time Chloe looked toward row 4, Sarah was already standing up, waving her arms. "Help! I need help here." Sarah's voice cracked, cutting through the low hum of the engines. Beatrice stiffened. A shout. In her cabin. She slammed the cheese tray down and marched out of the galley, her face a mask of fury. She bypassed Chloe and stormed up to row 4. "Ma'am," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You need to sit down immediately. The captain has not turned off the turbulence advisory for the crew. You are disturbing the other passengers." "My son," Sarah grabbed Beatrice's forearm, her grip desperate. "He's having an allergic reaction. I don't have his EpiPen. I need a doctor. Please call for a doctor." Beatrice looked down at Sarah's hand on her pristine uniform sleeve. She peeled Sarah's fingers off as if they were covered in slime. "Do not touch me," Beatrice said, her voice like steel. She glanced at Leo. The boy was slumped over, scratching his neck. To Beatrice, who had no medical training and zero empathy, he just looked like a brat throwing a tantrum or a kid who had eaten too much candy. "He is having a reaction," Sarah screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Look at his lips. He can't breathe. Lower your voice," Beatrice snapped. "You are scaring people. If he is sick, give him some water. I will not have you screaming in this cabin." "I need a doctor. You have to make an announcement." "I will do no such thing, based on your hysterics," Beatrice said, crossing her arms. "We are in the middle of meal service. If you continue to shout, I will have you restrained for interfering with a flight crew member. Sit down." Sarah stared at her, stunned by the wall of cold indifference. She looked at Leo. His eyes were rolling back. He was clawing at the air. "He's dying!" Sarah shrieked, the sound raw and terrifying. From row 1, the man in the charcoal suit lowered his newspaper. He turned his head, listening. Beatrice grabbed a bottle of water from a passing cart and shoved it into Sarah's hands. "Here, give him this and control your child. If I hear one more scream, I'm calling the cockpit to report a security threat." Beatrice spun on her heel and marched back to the galley, yanking the curtain shut so hard the rings rattled. "Unbelievable," Beatrice huffed to Chloe, her face flushed with anger. "Woman in 4B is trying to cause a scene to get free upgrades or something. Ignoring her is the only way to stop it." "But," the boy looked really pale. "Beatrice," Chloe said, her voice trembling, "should we just call a medic, just in case?" I said no. Beatrice slammed a drawer shut. "I know a scam when I see one. I've been flying for 20 years, Chloe. People use their kids as props all the time. If we call a doctor, we have to file a report, delay the meal service, and disturb Mr. Rockefeller. I am not ruining this flight because of an overreacting mother from economy." Back in row 4, Sarah dropped the water bottle. It rolled uselessly under the seat. She grabbed Leo's face. His skin was cold. His lips were blue. He wasn't moving air anymore. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt, stood up, and ran into the aisle. She didn't look at the curtain. She looked at the passengers. "Is anyone a doctor?" she screamed, her voice breaking into a sob that tore through the silent luxury of business class. "Please help my son." The drama was no longer contained, and Beatrice Smith was about to find out that some doors once closed can never be reopened. The silence in the business class cabin shattered like dropped glass. Sarah's scream, "Is anyone a doctor?" hung in the air, raw and terrified. Beatrice Smith didn't run to help. She marched. She moved with the aggressive, stiff-legged gait of a school principal determined to stamp out a rebellion. She ripped the curtain open, her face flushed not with concern, but with indignation. "I warned you," Beatrice hissed, closing the distance to row 4 in seconds. "I told you to sit down. You are now violating federal aviation regulations. You are creating a disturbance on an international flight." "Look at him," Sarah screamed, pointing at Leo. The boy was no longer thrashing. He was disturbingly still, slumped sideways against the window, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. His mouth was open, gasping like a fish out of water, but no sound was coming out. "He's choking," a woman in row 3 whispered, peering over her seat. "Oh my God, he's purple." "He is not choking," Beatrice announced loud enough for the cabin to hear, trying to control the narrative. "He is hyperventilating because his mother is in a panic state. It is a panic attack." She turned her glare on Sarah. "And you are feeding it. Sit down, put your mask on, and stop acting like an animal." "He needs epinephrine," Sarah cried, grabbing Beatrice's blazer. "Check the medical kit. You have to have a kit." Beatrice shoved Sarah's hand away violently. "Do not touch me. That is assault. I am the chief purser on this vessel, and I determine if a medical emergency is valid. We do not open the sealed medical kit for panic attacks. That requires paperwork and a pilot sign-off. Now sit down, or I will have you restrained in flex cuffs." "Restrain me, then," Sarah yelled, stepping into the aisle, blocking Beatrice's path. "Arrest me when we land. But save my son first." From the back of the economy cabin beyond the second curtain, a commotion was brewing. The screams had carried back there. Heads were craning. But Beatrice had positioned herself as a physical barrier between the frantic mother and the rest of the plane. "Chloe!" Beatrice barked over her shoulder. Chloe, the junior attendant, appeared looking pale and sick. "Yes, Beatrice. Get the restraints. Seat 4B is non-compliant." "But, Beatrice," Chloe stammered, looking at Leo. "The boy, his lips are blue, like actually blue. Maybe we should just page for a doctor, just to be safe." "I gave you an order." Beatrice snapped, her eyes bulging. "I'm not diverting a transatlantic flight and dumping 50,000 gallons of fuel because a kid from coach is having a tantrum. If we declare a medical emergency, we have to turn back. Do you know how much that costs the airline? Do you want that on your performance review?" Chloe flinched. The threat was clear. Beatrice held Chloe's career in her hands. I... Chloe froze. "Fine. I'll do it myself." Beatrice snarled. She reached for the phone on the wall to call the cockpit, but not to declare a medical emergency. She punched in the code for the flight deck. "Captain," Beatrice said, her voice instantly smoothing into a calm, professional tone. "We have a disruptive passenger in row 4, level 2 threat. She's screaming and refusing instructions. I'm handling it, but I might need to restrain her. Just wanted you to be aware." "Copy that, Beatrice," Captain Miller's voice crackled back, trusting his lead flight attendant implicitly. "Let us know if you need us to lock down the cockpit door. Keep it contained." "Will do." Beatrice hung up and smiled smugly at Sarah. "The captain is aware. You are now officially a security threat." Sarah collapsed to her knees in the aisle, sobbing. She grabbed Leo's limp hand. "Please, please, somebody help me. He's dying. He's my only baby." The passengers in business class were shifting uncomfortably. They were wealthy. Some were arrogant, but they weren't monsters. They were watching a child suffocate. "Hey," a man in row 2, a hedge fund manager named David, spoke up. "Beatrice, look, the kid does look bad. Maybe just ask if there's a doctor. What's the harm?" "The harm, Mr. Henderson," Beatrice said, pivoting to him with a strained smile, "is that if I make that announcement, I incite panic. And if we turn back, you miss your meeting in London. I am managing the cabin. Please enjoy your risotto." She turned back to Sarah, pulling a pair of plastic flex cuffs from her apron pocket. "Last warning. Sit down." Sarah didn't move. She was praying over her son, rocking back and forth. Leo's chest had stopped heaving. He was barely moving air. His eyes were open but unfocused, the pupils dilated. Beatrice stepped forward, the zip ties in her hand. She was going to arrest a grieving mother, while her child died 3 feet away. That was the moment the silence broke from the front of the plane. "That is quite enough." The voice was low, gravelly, and commanded absolute authority. It didn't shout, but it cut through the noise like a knife. Beatrice froze. She knew that voice. She turned slowly toward seat 1A. Arthur Rockefeller had stood up. He wasn't looking at his newspaper anymore. He was standing in the aisle, towering over the scene. He removed his reading glasses, folded them deliberately, and placed them in his breast pocket. "Mr. Rockefeller." Beatrice's voice wavered her aggressive mask, slipping for the first time. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance. I am handling this trash right now, so you can—" "Beatrice," Arthur said, stepping forward. He didn't look at her. He looked past her, straight at Leo. "Get out of the way." Beatrice blinked, stunned. "Excuse me, sir." "I said move," Arthur barked. The gentleness was gone. He shoved past Beatrice with a strength that surprised her, knocking her shoulder into the bulkhead. Arthur knelt beside Sarah. He didn't look at the mother. He looked at the boy. He placed 2 fingers on Leo's neck, then put his ear close to Leo's mouth. No breath sounds. Pulse is thready and racing. Bradycardia is setting in, Arthur muttered. He looked up at Sarah. "How long since the onset?" 5, maybe 10 minutes, Sarah sobbed. Is he dead?" Arthur ignored the question. He turned his head and shouted towards the back of the plane, his voice booming. "Is there a doctor on this plane? I don't care what cabin they are in. Get them up here now." Beatrice stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Sir, you cannot shout like that. You are violating safety protocols," Arthur spun on her. "I am the chairman of the board for the hospital group that insures this airline, you imbecile. Now open that goddamn medical kit, or I will personally see to it that you never work in a job that requires a name tag again." Beatrice went pale. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She fumbled for her keys. From the economy curtain, a young man with disheveled hair and a NYU Med hoodie burst through. He had been arguing with Chloe, but when he heard Arthur yell, he shoved Chloe aside. "I'm a 4th-year resident," the young man gasped, running to row 4. "ER resident. What do we have?" "Anaphylaxis," Arthur said, making space. "Pediatric male. Airway compromised. He's hypoxic." The young resident, whose name was Dr. Evans, put his stethoscope to Leo's chest. He listened for 2 seconds and pulled it away, his face grim. Silent chest. Airway is totally obstructed. He's not moving anything. Kit! Dr. Evans yelled at Beatrice. Beatrice, hands shaking uncontrollably, unlocked the overhead compartment and dropped the red medical duffel bag. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Dr. Evans tore it open. He ripped through the compartments. Bandages, saline, aspirin. "Where is the epinephrine?" Evans shouted. "Where is the 1/1000 solution?" Beatrice stood there, paralyzed. It should be in the red pouch." Evans ripped the red pouch open. It was there. A vial and a syringe. Drawing up 0.3 milligrams. Evans announced his hands steady, despite the chaos. He jammed the needle into the vial, drew the liquid, and without hesitating stabbed it through Leo's jeans into his thigh. "Come on, buddy," Evans whispered. "Come on." The entire business-class cabin was standing now. No one was eating. The air was thick with tension. Sarah was holding Leo's hand, squeezing it so hard her knuckles were white. 1 minute, Evans said, checking his watch. Pulse. Arthur checked the neck again. Still thready. No change in respiration. It's not working, Sarah wailed. Why isn't it working? Severe reaction, Evans said, sweat beading on his forehead. His blood pressure is bottoming out. The epi isn't circulating fast enough because he's in shock. Evans looked up at Beatrice. We need oxygen high flow, and get the AED ready, just in case. Beatrice scrambled to grab the portable oxygen tank. She handed the mask to Evans, who clamped it over Leo's face. Breath for him, Evans instructed Arthur. He handed Arthur the bag valve mask. Arthur nodded, taking the position at the head of the seat, squeezing the bag rhythmically. Whoosh, whoosh, but the chest wasn't rising. Resistance is too high, Arthur said grimly. The throat is swollen shut. The oxygen isn't getting in. Evans looked at the kit. He looked at Leo, whose face was now a terrifying shade of grey-blue. I need to intubate, Evans said, but I don't have the drugs to paralyze him. If he fights it, or if the throat is too swollen, do it, Arthur commanded. We don't have a choice. Evans grabbed the laryngoscope, a metal tool with a light on the end, used to pry open the mouth and throat. He tilted Leo's head back. Okay, buddy. Sorry about this, Evans muttered. He leveraged the blade into Leo's mouth. Sarah turned away, burying her face in the seat cushion, unable to watch. I can't see the cords, Evans said, panic creeping into his voice. It's just swollen tissue. It's a brick wall. He tried again. And again. I can't get the tube in, Evans yelled, throwing the scope down. His airway is gone. Arthur looked at Beatrice. How far are we from London? 5 hours, Beatrice whispered. And New York. 40 minutes back, she said. Arthur grabbed Beatrice by the shoulders. Call the captain. Tell him we are turning around. Tell him we have a dying child, and we need an emergency landing at JFK immediately. But... Beatrice stammered, glancing at the fuel dump implications. The fuel. Call him! Arthur roared a sound so loud it rattled the overhead bins. Beatrice grabbed the phone. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped it once before dialing. Captain, she choked out. Emergency, we have a code blue in row 4. We need to return to JFK. There was a pause on the line. Then the captain's voice, sharp and urgent. You told me it was a security threat, Beatrice. Is the passenger injured? No, Captain, Beatrice said, tears of fear welling up. It's a medical emergency. The boy is dying. Prepare the cabin, the captain said. We're dumping fuel. We're coming about. Tell them to have paramedics on the runway. The plane banked. It was a sharp, aggressive turn. Plates slid off trays in the galley. The engines roared as the thrust increased. We're turning, Evans said, but 40 minutes is too long. He doesn't have 40 minutes. He has 4. Sarah looked up, her eyes hollow. What? His heart is going to stop from lack of oxygen. Evans said, his voice breaking. I can't get air into him. Arthur Rockefeller looked at the medical kit. He saw a scalpel in a sterile packet. He looked at Dr. Evans. Can you do a criquet? Arthur asked. A cricothyrotomy, cutting the throat to insert a tube directly into the windpipe. It was a battlefield procedure. Risky, bloody, desperate. Evans looked at the scalpel. He looked at Leo. He looked at Sarah. I'm a resident, Evans whispered. I've only done it on cadavers. If I miss, I cut his jugular. He bleeds out in seconds. If you don't do it, Arthur said, his voice cold and hard, he is dead in 2 minutes. The plane shook as it hit turbulence in the storm clouds they were turning back into. The lights flickered. Evans picked up the scalpel. His hand was trembling. I can't, Evans said. The turbulence. I can't keep my hand steady. Arthur looked around. He needed someone to hold the boy. Someone to hold the light. He looked at Beatrice, who was standing there useless and terrified. You... Arthur pointed at her. Get down here. Me... Beatrice recoiled. Get down here and hold his head, Arthur commanded. You wanted to be in charge. Take charge. Hold his head so this man doesn't slit his throat. Beatrice fell to her knees. She had spent 20 years avoiding getting her hands dirty. Now she placed her manicured hands on Leo's sweat-drenched forehead. She looked down at the boy she had ignored. Up close, he didn't look like a security threat. He looked like a terrified little boy who was fading away. Hold him still, Evans said, ripping the packet open with his teeth. Don't you dare move. Sarah grabbed Arthur's hand. She couldn't speak. She could only watch. Evans felt Leo's neck searching for the landmarks through the swelling. He found the cricoid membrane. He positioned the blade. Light, Evans yelled. Arthur grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it directly at the incision site. Okay, Evans breathed. 3, 2, 1. He cut. Blood welled up instantly, bright red staining Beatrice's pristine uniform. She gasped, gagging, but she didn't let go. Arthur's glare pinned her in place. Evans worked his finger into the hole, widening it. He grabbed the breathing tube, bypassing the swollen mouth, and shoved it directly into the hole in Leo's neck. He attached the bag. Arthur squeezed. Whoosh! The chest rose. I have breath sounds, Evans yelled. Air is going in. Sarah let out a scream that was half sob, half laugh. Keep bagging him, Evans ordered. We aren't out of the woods. He needs a hospital. Now. The plane shuddered as it descended through the storm. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, tight and fast. Cabin crew seats for landing. Immediately. We are coming in hot. Beatrice couldn't move. She was kneeling in a pool of blood, holding the head of the boy she had almost killed. She looked up at Arthur Rockefeller. Arthur was staring at her. His look wasn't angry anymore. It was something worse. It was a promise. Pray that he lives, Beatrice. Arthur whispered, his voice, barely audible, over the screaming engines. Because if he doesn't, I will spend every penny I have to make sure you rot in a cell. Beatrice Smith closed her eyes as the landing gear dropped with a heavy thud. The karma had arrived. The Boeing 707 didn't glide toward JFK. It fell. The descent was violent. The storm that had delayed other flights was now tossing Flight 902 like a toy boat in a washing machine. The cabin lights flickered and died, leaving only the emergency floor lighting, casting eerie long shadows up the walls. In the aisle of row 4, the tableau was frozen in a terrifying strobe effect from the lightning outside. Doctor, Evans was hunched over Leo, one hand holding the makeshift tube in the boy's neck, the other checking the pulse. Arthur Rockefeller sat cross-legged on the floor, sweat dripping down his expensive suit, rhythmically squeezing the resuscitation bag. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. And Beatrice Smith. Beatrice was the anchor. Her knees were bruised against the metal seat track. Her hands, usually so careful not to touch anything, without a napkin were clamped around Leo's head to keep his neck stable against the turbulence. The blood was warm and sticky. It was everywhere on her cuffs, her skirt soaking into the knees of her pantyhose. 1,000 feet! The captain's voice barked over the PA, sounding strained. Brace for impact! Brace! 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 Hold him tight! Evans screamed at Beatrice as the plane lurched sideways. If that tube dislodges, he dies instantly. Beatrice sobbed a sound of pure terror. I'm holding him. I'm holding him. She looked down at Leo's face. The blue tinge was fading, replaced by a pale, ghostly white, but his chest was rising. He was alive. Because of the men she had tried to silence. Wham! The landing gear hit the runway with the force of a car crash. The entire airframe groaned. Overhead bins popped open, spilling carry-on bags into the aisles. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling in a tangle of yellow plastic. Beatrice was thrown forward, her chest slamming into the seatback of row 3, but she didn't let go. She couldn't. Arthur's eyes were locked on her, daring her to move. The brakes screamed. The reverse thrusters roared like dragons, vibrating the floorboard so violently that Beatrice's teeth clattered together. The plane shuddered, skidding slightly on the wet tarmac before the pilot corrected it. Slowly, agonizingly, the beast slowed down. 100 knots. 60 knots. Taxi speed. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain said, his breath heavy in the microphone. Stay in your seats. Paramedics are boarding. Stay down. The plane hadn't even come to a full stop at the gate when the forward door was blown open. The jet bridge wasn't even attached yet. They had stopped on the tarmac. A mobile stairway truck slammed against the side. Rain and noise flooded the cabin. 4 paramedics in high-visibility rain gear stormed in, carrying heavy trauma cases. "Where is he?" the lead paramedic shouted. "Row 4, Arthur bellowed. The paramedics swarmed the aisle. Beatrice was shoved aside, collapsing against the bulkhead. She watched, trembling, as they assessed the work Evans had done. "Who did the crick?" the lead medic asked, shining a light into the bloody incision. "I did," Evans croaked, wiping blood from his face. "4th-year resident. I had no choice. Complete airway obstruction." The medic nodded, impressed. "Clean cut. You saved him, Doc. Let's package him up. Go, go, go." They moved with practiced chaos. Leo was lifted onto a backboard. Monitors were attached, and oxygen lines were swapped. Sarah was right there, her hand on Leo's ankle, whispering to him, even though he was unconscious. As they lifted Leo to carry him out, Sarah stopped. She turned back. She didn't look at the passengers. She looked at Beatrice. Beatrice was slumped on the floor, a mess of blood and ruined luxury. She looked up, expecting Sarah to scream at her, to hit her. But Sarah just looked at her. The look wasn't hate. It was pity. It was the look you give something small and broken. "You should have just listened," Sarah whispered. Then she turned and ran after the stretcher, disappearing into the rain. The cabin fell silent. The engines had been cut. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the heavy breathing of the passengers. Beatrice tried to stand up. Her legs wobbled. She looked down at her hands. They were stained crimson. I need to wash up," she mumbled, reaching for a wet wipe from a discarded tray. "Don't you touch that blood." Arthur Rockefeller was standing up. He wiped his hands on a linen napkin, but he didn't clean himself fully. He buttoned his suit jacket, regaining his composure instantly. "What?" Beatrice blinked, dazed. "That blood is evidence," Arthur said coldly. "And you are a crime scene." He turned to the passengers in business class, who were staring in shock. "Did everyone hear her refuse the mother's plea for help?" Arthur asked, his voice projecting clearly. "I heard it," the hedge fund manager in row 2 said, standing up. "She said the kid was faking it." "I heard it too," said a woman in row 3. "She called it a security threat." "I have it recorded," a teenager in row 5 said, holding up an iPhone. "I started filming when she threatened to cuff the mom." Arthur nodded. He looked back at Beatrice. "The police are waiting at the bottom of the stairs, Ms. Smith. I suggest you don't keep them waiting." The interrogation room at JFK's Port Authority Police Precinct was cold, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a stark contrast to the first-class cabin Beatrice was used to. Beatrice sat at a metal table. She had been allowed to wash her hands, but her uniform had been seized as evidence. She was wearing a grey paper jumpsuit provided by the police. She looked small, aged 10 years in the last 2 hours. Across from her sat Detective Harrison and a representative from the airline's legal team, a sharp-faced woman named Ms. Vance. "Look," Beatrice said, her voice raspy. "I followed protocol. The passenger in 4B was hysterical. We are trained to identify unruly behavior. How was I supposed to know the child was actually sick? People lie all the time to get upgrades or attention." "So you denied medical aid because you assumed they were liars?" Detective Harrison asked, scribbling in his notebook. "I denied aid because the mother was screaming and refusing to sit down during turbulence," Beatrice retorted, trying to find her old spark of authority. "I was protecting the safety of the other passengers. That is my primary job, safety." Ms. Vance, the airline lawyer, stayed silent. She was tapping away on her tablet, her face unreadable. "Ms. Smith," Detective Harrison said, leaning forward. "We have statements from 6 passengers and 2 of your own flight attendants. They all say the mother asked for a doctor calmly at first. They say you refused to check the medical kit. They say you threatened to arrest her while her son was turning blue." "They are confused," Beatrice lied. "It was chaotic." "Is that so?" The door to the interrogation room opened. The police captain walked in. Behind him was a man in a fresh suit, looking immaculate despite the ordeal. Arthur Rockefeller. Beatrice stiffened. "Why is he here? He's just a passenger." Arthur didn't sit. He stood by the door, arms crossed. "Ms. Smith," Arthur said smoothly, "do you know who owns the insurance holding company that underwrites Transatlantic Airways?" Beatrice blinked. I don't know." "AIG Lloyd's, Rockefeller Global Risk," Arthur said. That's me. I am the man who decides if your airline is too risky to insure. And today I decided that employing you is a liability my company can no longer afford. He tossed a folder onto the table. It slid across and hit Beatrice's hands. That is a transcript of the cockpit voice recorder which I had pulled 30 minutes ago, Arthur said, and the audio from the cabin surveillance. Beatrice's mouth went dry. Cabin. Surveillance. New retrofits. Miss Vance finally spoke up, looking at Beatrice with disdain. Business class has audio-visual monitoring for liability reasons. We installed them last month. You signed the memo acknowledging it. Beatrice felt the room spin. She hadn't read the memo. She never read the memos. We heard everything, Beatrice, Ms. Vance said, closing her tablet. We heard you call the child trash. We heard you tell the junior attendant Chloe to ignore the call button. We heard you threaten to restrain a dying child. Beatrice stammered. I was stressed. It was a long week. It's negligence, Detective Harrison said, closing his notebook. Criminal negligence, reckless endangerment. And since the aircraft was in flight, it falls under federal jurisdiction. Am I being fired? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. Ms. Vance laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Fired, Beatrice, the airline is terminating you for cause effective immediately. We are also stripping your pension to cover the legal settlement we are about to pay that family. But that's the least of your worries. Detective Harrison stood up and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Real metal ones, not the plastic zip ties Beatrice loved to threaten people with. Beatrice Smith, Harrison said, walking around the table. Stand up. No, Beatrice whispered. I have a union rep. You can't. Your union rep saw the video, Ms. Vance said. They declined to send a lawyer. You're on your own. The cold steel clicked around Beatrice's wrists. You are under arrest for federal assault, child endangerment, and interference with a flight crew member's duties, specifically the doctor who was trying to save a life, Harrison recited. As they hauled her out of the room, Arthur Rockefeller stepped into her path. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. I told you, Arthur said softly. The golden curtain doesn't protect you from being a human being. You treated that boy like cargo. Now you're going to be treated like a prisoner. Beatrice was marched out into the precinct hallway. It was lined with reporters. The video from the teenager in row 5 had already gone viral. It had 3 million views. The flashes of the cameras blinded her. She lowered her head, hiding her face, but it was too late. The world had seen her. Ms. Smith! Ms. Smith! A reporter shouted. Did you really tell a dying boy to shut up? Beatrice didn't answer. She was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her in. It was a different kind of pressurized tube, but this one wasn't going to London. It was going to Rikers Island. Back in the precinct, Arthur turned to Ms. Vance. I want the family taken care of, Arthur said. Full medical coverage. For life. And a settlement that means Sarah never has to work again. Or I pull your insurance policy by morning. Ms. Vance swallowed hard. Consider it done, Mr. Rockefeller. And the boy? Arthur asked. He's in surgery at Mount Sinai, Detective Harrison said. Dr. Torrevans is with him. They say the cricothyrotomy saved his life, but there was swelling in the brain from the hypoxia. He's in a coma. Arthur's face fell. The victory over Beatrice felt hollow. If he wakes up, Arthur said, it's a miracle. If he doesn't, Ms. Smith's charges get upgraded to manslaughter. The storm outside had passed, but the turbulence for Beatrice Smith had only just begun. 3 months had passed since Flight 902 touched down in the storm. The federal courthouse in downtown Brooklyn was packed. It wasn't just local press anymore. The story had gone global. The video of a flight attendant sneering at a dying child had become a symbol of corporate cruelty. Beatrice Smith sat at the defendant's table. She wore a plain brown suit bought off the rack. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, was pulled back in a severe, messy bun. She looked hollowed out. The arrogance that had defined her career was gone, replaced by a jittery terror. The prosecution had been ruthless. They played the tapes. They played the cell phone video. They put Dr. Evans on the stand, who described in graphic detail how close Leo had been to death. But the most damning witness wasn't an expert. It was Chloe Beatrice's former junior attendant. She told me to ignore the call button. Chloe had testified, weeping. She said they were trash, trying to get a free upgrade. I wanted to help, but I was scared of her. She ran that cabin like a dictator. Now it was time for the verdict. Judge Merrick, a stern woman, known for her dislike of corporate negligence, shuffled her papers. The courtroom went deadly silent. Beatrice Smith. Judge Merrick began, her voice echoing. In 20 years on the bench, I have seen crimes of passion, crimes of greed and crimes of desperation, but I have rarely seen a crime of such pure, unadulterated coldness. Beatrice trembled, clutching a tissue. You had the training. You had the resources. You had a doctor begging you for equipment. And yet you chose your ego over a child's life. The judge continued. You didn't just fail to do your job. You actively obstructed those who were trying to do it for you. Please, Your Honor. Beatrice sobbed, standing up shakily. I lost my job. I lost my pension. I've lost everything. You lost your job, Judge Merrick shot back. Sarah Jenkins almost lost her son. The judge banged the gavel. On the charge of reckless endangerment in the first degree, I find you guilty. On the charge of interference with flight crew members. Guilty. The crowd murmured. Beatrice Smith, I am sentencing you to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Furthermore, you are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list for life. You will never step foot on an airplane again, not even as a passenger. Beatrice's knees buckled. A bailiff caught her before she hit the floor. The gatekeeper of the Golden Curtain would now be spending the next 5 years behind a curtain of iron bars. As she was led away in handcuffs, she looked into the gallery. She saw Arthur Rockefeller sitting in the back row. He didn't smile. He simply nodded a silent confirmation that the debt had been paid. 5 miles away at Mount Sinai Hospital, the scene was very different. The room was quiet, filled with sunlight and flowers sent by strangers from all over the world. Sarah Jenkins sat in the chair she hadn't left for 90 days. She was reading a comic book aloud. And then Spider-Man swung from the building to save the train. She read her voice hoarse. In the bed, Leo lay still. The swelling was gone. The scar on his neck from the emergency surgery was healing into a thin, white line. But his eyes remained closed. The doctors called it a hypoxic brain injury. They said the lack of oxygen had been too long. They said Sarah should prepare for long-term care. The door opened. It was Dr. Evans, now out of his residency, and wearing a white coat with his name embroidered on it. With him was Arthur Rockefeller. Any change? Evans asked softly. Sarah shook her head, wiping a tear. No, I keep reading to him. They say he can hear me. Arthur walked to the bedside. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. He's a fighter, Sarah. I saw it on the plane. He held on when anyone else would have let go. He shouldn't have had to fight, Sarah whispered. He was just a boy going to see his grandma. I know, Arthur said. By the way, the settlement was finalized this morning. The airline has deposited $5 million into a trust for Leo's care. And Beatrice, she was sentenced today. 5 years. Sarah didn't look up. It doesn't matter. None of it matters if he doesn't wake up. Suddenly, the heart monitor skipped a beat. Beep, 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 beep. Sarah froze. She looked at the machine. Leo's hand, resting on the sheet, twitched. Did you see that? Sarah gasped. Leo. Evans moved quickly, shining a penlight into Leo's eyes. Leo's eyelids fluttered. They squeezed shut tight, then slowly, agonizingly peeled open. He blinked against the harsh sunlight. He looked confusingly at the white ceiling, then turned his head slowly to the left. He saw his mother. Mum, he rasped. His voice was weak, barely a whisper, damaged by the tube and the trauma. Sarah screamed. It was a sound of pure joy that echoed down the hospital corridor. She threw herself onto the bed, burying her face in his chest. I'm here, baby. I'm here. Leo looked past his sobbing mother. He saw the tall man in the suit standing at the foot of the bed. Who is that? Leo whispered. Arthur smiled, tears welling in his own eyes for the first time in years. I'm just a friend, Leo, Arthur said. Just a guy who was sitting in seat 1A. Leo smiled weakly. Did we make it to Grandma's? Not yet, buddy. Evans laughed, checking the vitals. But we'll get you there. First class this time. 6 months later, at a federal correctional facility in Connecticut, inmate 894 moved through the cafeteria line. Beatrice Smith wore a shapeless orange jumpsuit. Her hands, once manicured, were chapped from scrubbing floors. She reached the serving station. The woman ladling the slop onto trays was a former passenger. She had once been rude to on a flight years ago. Karma works in mysterious ways, though Beatrice didn't recognize her. Move it along, the woman barked, splashing grey mush onto Beatrice's tray. Excuse me, Beatrice mumbled, looking down. Can I have a little more? I'm hungry. The woman looked at Beatrice with cold indifference. Sorry, the woman sneered. Extra food is for premium inmates. Move along. Beatrice took her tray and walked to a lonely table in the corner. She sat down, staring at the plastic fork. She closed her eyes and imagined the hum of the engines, the smell of champagne, the power she used to wield. But when she opened her eyes, there was no golden curtain, just concrete walls, the smell of bleach, and the long, silent realization that she was finally exactly where she belonged. Beatrice Smith thought her uniform gave her the right to decide who lived and who died. She thought wealth and status were the only things that mattered. But in the end, it was a mother's love, a stranger's courage, and a young doctor's shaky hands that proved her wrong. Beatrice lost her career, her freedom, and her dignity, while Leo got a second chance at life. It's a brutal reminder that how you treat people when you think no one is watching is the only thing that truly defines you. The golden curtain might separate seats on a plane, but it doesn't separate us from the consequences of our actions. If this story made your blood boil and your heart break, hit that like button right now. Do you think Beatrice's sentence was fair, or should it have been longer? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe that karma always collects its debts, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of justice served. Thanks for watching and fly safe.